Death and divorce, they're two of the most damaging things that can happen to a family. They can also create major feuds over money. Family financial expert Jennifer Openshaw and attorney Les Kotzer have witnessed a lot of such feuds. They're telling us how to avoid them. And thank you for sticking around. I've got an email here from Don, and I'm going to throw this to you, Jennifer. Don says, if I am a single parent and pass away without a will, does my estate go automatically to my two children, evenly distributed?
If he's single, it would typically go to your children, but if they're underage, typically what's going to happen without having an executor is that the state is going to decide how those assets will be distributed. You'll still have to go through the process, and so absolutely, if you have kids, particularly again under 18 and they may need a guardian, you absolutely need a will. That will would designate who the guardian of the children are, as well as the distribution of those assets, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to do it.
Good. We have Terry on the line from Maryland. Terry, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, sir. My name is Terry Simon, and I have an uncle that passed, and he left this will in secret, but only the executive and lawyer know what is in there, and they would just say, well, you're getting 21%, but they're not actually disclosing what's the assets, and the family's fighting over what money is what, but nobody knows except for the lawyer. So how do we get that information disclosed to us?
That's actually, I just want to point out something else. Les may want to mention it, but that's actually a great example of why I think it's so important for parents, particularly, to sit down and share with their children what their plans are, because it's going to avoid so many arguments down the road. I think many people, parents, assume that everything will be fine. They ignore the sibling rivalries, as Les was mentioning earlier, and there's no question that those feelings, those emotions are going to come out later. And so, first of all, parents should put in writing what their wishes are, but secondly, to share them with their children and other heirs.
I agree, absolutely, and I think that it's important that you contact the executor, because as I said before, the executor has to follow the will, and the executor has an obligation to account. My partner Barry Fish and I, we do a lot of estates, and people call us, and we want to be open, and we tell the executor be open as much as we can with the beneficiaries. We don't want people dragging the executor through the court. And we have, as I mentioned before, we have a book, but we also have a website, familyfight.com. And if you want to read stories about fighting over with executors and fighting between brothers and sisters, Colin, I'll tell you something. People email us on our website. They can email me direct. My site is right on that site, familyfight.com. And they can tell us their stories, and if we can do any help or whatever we can do, we can email back. But the fact is, we see this over and over again. He's not disclosing. My brother won't tell me. Parents appointed only one sibling and not the other two. So in one case, we had to ask two brothers to leave the room because the sibling who was the executor said, I want my brothers to leave the room. And we had to ask the brothers to leave. All the parents had to do in their will was put all three as executors with a majority clause, which would allow all three to be in the room and two out of the three make a vote. And that would have created democracy. And unfortunately, parents don't realize a lot of these things.
And I think sometimes, by the way, I want to point out that sometimes having multiple siblings as executors on the other side can create some conflict. And so it may make sense in certain situations to have a family friend or somebody that you believe and also that the children believe will be fair and appoint them as the executor.
Absolutely. But be careful in your own family of creating a dictator as the executor. You parents have to talk. And as a child out there, if you don't want to be an executor, tell your parents. This should be a communication now. It shouldn't be a surprise on the death that, oh, I'm an executor. What do I do? They should be a communication throughout your life. And if you don't want to do it, tell your parents now.
Okay.
And less obviously, the costs can be very high, too, to be an executor.
Absolutely.
And, so
I'm going to cut in here because our phones are just blowing up. There's a lot of viewers interested in this topic. We have Linda from Colorado on the phone. Go ahead, Linda.
Yes. My mother received an inheritance from my aunt. And my sibling and my nephew are accusing myself and my husband of unduly influencing her in her use of this inheritance and not advantaging that inheritance, not having it grow the way it should. And they want to sue us after she is gone.
Are you the executor? I don't follow the question. Has she
I am the executor, yes.
Well, an executor has an obligation to invest money. Usually it's prudently or wisely in investments. I don't think you're under any obligation to make this grow 100%. But again, as executors, there is liability. You have to make sure those assets are protected, that there's insurance on assets. it's not an easy job to be an executor. A lot of people think it's an honor. When you read the book and you go through some of these issues, realize it's not necessarily an honor. There's a lot of obligation on the executor.
And what Les is referring to, too, is that the obligation, it's a fiduciary obligation, so you as executor have to respond as if it's your own money.
We're talking about how you can avoid fighting over money when someone in your family dies or gets a divorce. Family financial expert Jennifer Openshaw and attorney Les Kotzer are answering your questions. And Jennifer and Les, I have an email here from Jay from Pittsburgh. Jay says, is there a time limit to settle an estate, and if so, what is it?
It depends. In some jurisdictions, it can be a year. I've heard of other jurisdictions where it's less. There's what's called an executor's year in a lot of jurisdictions that give the executor time to settle the estate, pay the debts, etc.
Jennifer?
I'm right with Les, and wrap it up the sooner the better. It's probably better for everybody who's involved, just to avoid sort of the anxiety and other emotional feelings that can emerge.
Okay, and we have on the phone Gloria from California. Hello, Gloria.
Hello.
Your question?
Yes, I have income property, 3 adult siblings, 2 kind of professionals. One's a teacher and the other one's business. The third has a mental disorder of sorts, and he can't communicate very well. My mother left them a similar property, and there was terrible consequences. It was income property. They could not get along. The 2 adult ones came to blows over the money, received from the rental properties. The third one didn't receive any money. It was set up for auto payment because it was not paid for. I should not have. However, I borrowed money for them on my good credit record out of the property because it was clear when she died. They each got equal shares. I saw to that, $40,000 or so apiece. And I put the property on auto payment for all of the expenses. However, I'm 78. I got tired of managing it. I turned it over to them, and there were dire consequences.
Who wants to help her out?
No, I'll tell you, it's tragic to hear of these siblings fighting. You know, what I try to tell parents and kids is that, you know, these are the kids that shared the childhood, the kids that drove to the Grand Canyon in the back of Dad's car together. I think it's time you start, you know, in this situation, or any siblings out there, if you're about to fight, to look at your family photos. Bring that back. You know, I even wrote a song that's coming out shortly called Photos in a Drawer with the world-famous Lou Mann and Wendy Watson, because I'm trying to practice a little bit of emotional law, bringing people a little bit of heart, carrying it to heartstrings. When I hear these siblings that are at war, they'll never talk to each other again. These are
sounds
kids.
like the other thing, too, is that your mother perhaps didn't think of the worst-case scenario, and that's what parents really need to think about, is what's the worst-case scenario, that one of these properties generates more income than another one, it goes up in value, or one goes down in value. I mean, those are some of the things that I think folks need to think about, so that ultimately there's fairness and there's less of that rivalry.
And equality isn't always fairness either in a will. A lot of parents think if I just stamp an equal sign on my will, it's going to be fair and equal and the kids won't fight. I've seen tremendous battles between kids where there was equal because one child was a caregiver and the caregiver child says, it's not fair that I got the same as my brothers who live in Europe and they only call Mother on Mother's Day. And I did all this work. So it's very important. Very important.
I've got a quick question. What about big ticket items, and we only have a limited amount of time here?
Well, you remember there's one thing. You can never share a painting on the wall or a table in the hall. And the fact is that as parents, you have to pay attention to these particular items. They're very important to these children. Talk to your kids now and do it now. Don't leave this up to chance. It shouldn't be a secret. It shouldn't be a surprise on a parent's death.
Okay, Jennifer, we've got about...
And real quickly, property, for example, if it's joint tenants, that means that when I pass on, for example, it's going to go to my partner, which is going to override anything that's in a will. And that's very important for people to remember. The same with investment accounts. If there's a beneficiary listed, it'll go there first.
All right. Hey, it's great to see both of you. Thanks,
Thank you
Jennifer
so much.
Openshaw and Les Kotzer. Great information.
Thank you.